Hello and welcome to masterclass number 22. My name's Morag from the Permaculture Education Institute and Our Permaculture Life. Now this is number 22 of a series of permaculture masterclasses that are all online and free. And the topic for tonight's session is about permaculture's response to the bushfire crises that we've been facing here in Australia. Now, I welcome you all. Some of you are here as part of the Permaculture Educators Program, and some of you are here for the first time. Welcome. Some of you have watched many of the masterclasses that I've put online before. So for those of you who know the format of these masterclasses and have been to them, a number of them before, you might notice something different. So rather than it being a class, I've actually headed down to have a chat with the co-originator of permaculture, David Holmgren, in his home at Melliodora in Hepburn, Victoria. And we had a conversation about what are the key things that he feels are the way that permaculture can respond to this bushfire crisis. So David's conversation is the bulk of tonight's masterclass, and I've included at the end a couple of little snippets of things that are to come very soon. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, well, at least the land on which I'm meeting with you today, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and to pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And also to acknowledge that I'm meeting with you here on land that has never been ceded, that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. You may well be able to hear that it's raining outside now, which is such a welcome relief after everything that we've been through here in Australia, with firstly the drought and then the bushfires. But in some places the rain has been really heavy and come in storms, and we've had massive flooding going on in here in Australia, which has caused a lot of problems, and not much of that too has been related to the fact that now we're getting runoff and erosion happening on those slopes that have been denuded of their landscape. And what that's doing is it's taking down that ash into the rivers, into the streams and into the oceans, and that's causing an enormous amount of damage there too. So this topic around bushfire is just the beginning of the conversation, and I think this is something that we're going to be continuing on for quite some time. I'd like to begin this masterclass session with a bit of a flashback to a little post I made back on the 6th of January when I was actually in the midst of the bushfire area in East Gippsland in Victoria. Hi everyone, it's Morag from Our Permaculture Life, and today the smoke has descended on East Gippsland. Probably the worst day of smoke down here around Paynesville and Raymond Island. So far in Australia we hear that probably about 12 million acres of forest have been burnt, 500 million animals have been what's been called toasted, thousands, almost 2,000 homes. So many people have lost their lives, businesses have been burnt to the ground, farms, livestock. It's just an absolute calamity of epic proportions. And, there is no business as usual anymore. From this point onwards, people need to wake up, things need to change. We need to have a completely different way that we make decisions about everything that we do. And we knew this was coming. It's not a surprise, but here it is. And now it's time that we actually roll up our sleeves and really start to make a difference. So I'm here in East Gippsland for another couple of weeks, helping my parents with their house here, because we're still in threat. It's not over. The fire season's not over. It's been going for months. Mid-September was when the fires started over in East Gippsland, further up from here. February's meant to be the biggest fire season. We've only just started January, so there's a lot more coming. A lot's been burnt already, but still we hear it's not over yet. So it's beyond belief, really. It's to be in the middle of this, to be living through something as catastrophic as this is just, it's mind-boggling. So for me, I'm going to stay focused on permaculture and trying to stay positive and looking at how to rebuild from a resilience perspective, helping to rebuild local communities, to be sharing really robust strategies of how to design bushfire resilience and bushfire resilient food systems, bushfire resilient homes, water systems, and focus on also supporting youth through the Permaculture Youth Program and help to set up things like the Permaculture Ambassador Program. So there's a lot that we can do, and I think the thing is not to get stuck in the anxiety and the stress of it all, but to actually just say, okay, well, yeah, from this point onwards, my whole entire life is reoriented towards making a positive difference and helping to repair the earth. So after the session with David, I've just included a couple of little snips of some of the films that I'm making, films that I was inspired to make as a response to the fire, being in the midst of the East Gippsland fires in January. Now, I went to visit a friend of mine, Daryl Taylor, who lived through the disastrous fires in Kinglake 11 years ago. And he's building an earth-sheltered home based on permaculture and biotecture. And so his experience of living through the bushfire catastrophe, the disaster, and what it's been like to pick up the pieces and to move forward and to start to rebuild in a resilient way. And I also visited my aunt who lives in an earth-sheltered home that was designed about 25 years ago in response to the fires that came through East Gippsland in the 1980s. So these two homes, earth-sheltered home and earth-covered home, and looking at how permaculture has been used to design those and to design the landscapes surrounding and to work with communities beyond. So this is the first part of a number of films that are coming. So I do encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Our Permaculture Life. So you can find links to that below. And I also do encourage you to also subscribe to my blog, because I'll be adding extra information there too about different ways to respond to the bushfire. Now, also throughout this, David Holmgren has pointed out some of the things that he's been writing. So he has an essay about the bushfire response, which I've put a link to as well. And he's also released 2 of the chapters from his book, Retrosuburbia, which respond directly to bushfires and disaster management. So I'll put a link to those too. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with David in his garden at Meliadora, exploring permaculture's response to the bushfires and also more broadly to the climate and ecological crises that we're facing. Well, thanks, David, for meeting with me today. We're here at Meliadora, and I've come to meet with David about permaculture's response to the bushfire catastrophe we've just had here in Australia. And I'm just talking to David before, and he was actually saying, in fact, that permaculture was born out of a response to bushfire. So maybe we could start at that point, like how did permaculture respond to bushfire in the early days, and how it can continue to respond to the changing bushfires that we're experiencing today in 2020?
Yeah, well, of course, I met Bill Mollison in 1974, not that many years after the great 1967 fires that swept down out of the mountains to Hobart, killing substantial numbers of people. That place where permaculture was crafted on the footslopes of Mount Wellington was a place that Bill Mollison had saved from those 67 fires with a mop and a bucket, he said, and then saved another 4 houses while another dozen burnt down on Strickland Avenue around him. That was my introduction to the dynamics of catastrophic wildfire and the role of active, resilient people. And it was also the place where we started to think about, well, what are not just more bushfire resistant buildings, but bushfire resistant landscapes composed of vegetation that is, if not unburnable, is more fire dampening than fire accelerating. And that was part of his experience on that site. And I think for me, the Ash Wednesday fires of '83 were another sort of charge up in my personal and design focus on bushfire resilient landscapes and communities, and then again after the great Black Saturday fires, and then these new fires have initiated me back into that process. But that idea at the beginning was that designing, especially with a view to the future, of the long-term thinking that was built into permaculture from the beginning, if we are going to plant long-lived, slow-growing trees to provide for ourselves and future generations, we're automatically thinking into the future. So that means we have to think about what are those futures, and what are the perturbations and disruptions that one has to navigate. So design against disaster was an inherent element, almost a driving element of permaculture from the beginning. And of course for Tasmania and southeastern Australia, that means more than anything else, design against bushfire.
So how have you woven in that thinking? Because you were saying that this is one of the more bushfire prone areas of Victoria, Australia, and possibly the world therefore. So how have you embedded that thinking here, both at your property but also thinking beyond the boundaries of your place into common lands, and then how do you see that rippling out even further into a regional approach to thinking about bushfire management through a permaculture lens?
Yeah, well, certainly coming to Hepburn Springs in the mid-'80s, not long after the Ash Wednesday fires and the work we did that led to the Flywire House publication, I was very aware, and my assessment was this was probably one of the most fire-prone towns, not fire-prone, fire-vulnerable towns in Victoria. And our house was designed as a bushfire-resistant house, even though the building inspector at the time said, "Oh, you wouldn't need to worry about that, you're part of the town."
That's right.
And so that has been a major theme here that we documented and that we've talked about on all the tours we run here over the years. Of course, it's part of integrated permaculture design where the plants, the building, all of these things are not just there, or those elements just there because they're safer in a bushfire. And all of that design has also been part of a long-term commitment to stay and defend this property as a safe sanctuary. From '83 to 2009, that message was actually in accord with what the official recommendations were. Since then, I've more shifted my position, I haven't shifted my position, but the attitude has moved away from the stay and defend strategy. We're still completely committed to that. After Black Saturday, we did some refinements of not just the building infrastructure, but of course our bushfire plan. And what has been involved over the years is a lot of work of what we would call beyond the boundaries, managing the common land. So an active management of the public land, which around us is sort of like abandoned wasteland from the gold era.
So what are some of the key strategies that you're using in that?
Well, firstly, there's been management of fuel to accelerate decomposition rather than using the match as the solution. So we haven't actually done any fuel reduction burning here. Partly because I see it as, yes, a powerful tool, but a dangerous tool. It's a bit like broadacre ploughing for farmers. Yes, it's great, it achieves certain things, but you set the system back. There's all sorts of disadvantages. So we've done fuel rearrangement, slashing, cutting, compacting, rehydration with water flows from storm water to always accelerate decomposition. We've always planted fire retardant or low fire hazard trees rather than more eucalypts and pines and those sorts of species.
You recently had a fire coming right up to the edge of that. So
Yeah.
what were the things that you noticed there that really made a difference to helping that area to be protected and that to be the edge of the fire?
Well, the rehydrated creek, which had a corridor of willows that we didn't plant, they were wild, but we had been actively defending them against catchment authority willow removal programs, were where the fire stopped. Now, there were other factors in that in terms of timing, but local CFA and other fire experts in reviewing that fire acknowledged that that vegetation was a factor.
So how do we negotiate that when we have one side saying, you know, this is a weed and it must be removed, and on the other hand, looking at what you've just said, how do we manage that edge there?
Oh, well, these are some of the things in land management that we can see how destructive development and inappropriate development, locating houses in incredibly fire-prone environments, and dense regrowth forests that have come from cycles of heavy logging are all part of, you know, making the landscape more fire hazardous. But on the environmental side, there needs to be some acknowledgement that some of the ideology within the environment movement has maybe been misplaced. Apart from the focus on removing exotic vegetation that may actually be fire retardant and water enhancing in different ways, there's also been the notion that really comes from terra nullius, that this was an empty land, that if it's nature, we just should leave it alone and it will return to some balanced state. No, Australia was the oldest cultural landscape in the world. So even if all the other factors hadn't changed, and even if we didn't have climate change driving this accelerating fire climate, then abandoning the bush and saying it will restore some sort of balance was certainly naive and definitely wrong. So we do have to manage our landscapes, but there's of course an enormous worry or concern that we do that by just destroying it. And of course we have a long history of that. So my latest essay on this subject is saying, okay, this interface area between where people live and the bush, bush edge suburbs, small towns like this, these are the areas where the greatest sort of hazard or risks are. Surely we should be actively managing those areas. And at the moment, the default management is fuel reduction burning, occasionally big machine groomers, mulching up, and then of course the old one of why don't we clear back swathes, push back the forest and have a mown landscape, which actually doesn't necessarily help because you just get ember storms driven into exposed
And I've
houses.
heard too that it actually across an open space the fire can travel faster.
Oh yeah, it does in the open wind. Yeah, so the missing link in that in terms of management is that accelerating decomposition, change in priorities to species planting and species preferencing in that interface zone, and then the other aspect, which is the really basic one, is thinning the forest, which really means removing small stunted trees which are already reducing in their moisture content, starting to become potential fuel which will carry a fire into being a severe crown fire. So if we lived in Sweden or Slovenia or Japan or many other countries that actively manage their forests, this would be obvious and done everywhere, whereas we largely don't do it because we either think trees are a crop grown for timber on some plantation, or their perfect nature that you shouldn't touch.
So what
anything.
you're essentially saying is that it's our relationship to the forest that is actually the problem.
Yes, that we need to treat it as the common that we actively manage and use. And another traditional aspect of that, of course, in the past was animals. And grazing animals and herbivore animals like kangaroos, they actually all get the benefit from a thinned, opened, more grassy, herbaceous forest where they are attracted, and then their eating and their manure and trampling actually contributes to decomposition. Now, of course, how we manage that, it's again, animals in the forest, terrible, or animals in the creek. What we know, for example, is that goats, rather than cows and sheep, in general are the most useful animal in that regard, and they don't walk in the water and damage wetlands, mainly because they're water phobic and they hate getting their hooves wet. So a lot of that is not sort of widely understood, and even in our land management authorities, they, the parks authorities, they have an ideological hatred of livestock.
Yes.
They just see it as like, that's the worst.
So they would rather use chemicals to manage it as opposed to animals.
Yeah, and of course, when we use fire and chemicals and clearing, we're mostly actually desiccating the landscape, drying the landscape out, actually making it more likely to burn. So there's this trade-off between we need the biomass, but we need to manage it into a form. And in simplifying what is obviously a very sort of a complex and diverse picture, that mostly means big, wide-spaced, healthy trees with low ground cover.
Okay. Oh, that's a bit nice. We're in the shade now.
It's
nice being in the sun, but it's also, getting a bit burnt there. So we were talking about managing the forest differently, and you were mentioning about how we actually need to thin them. We need to shift our relationship about how we think about forests and how we manage the forest. And so you've been doing that at a community level in creating commons.
Yeah.
Is there a way to how would people access more of those commons? Because commons is something that we haven't really got a sense of here in Australia terribly much. It's almost like you've kind of inhabited that space. So both at a community level, but also more broadly, what do you recommend that people do to start managing forests in that way? How do we shift?
Well, we've done that by very deliberately not asking for permission and being prepared to maybe ask for forgiveness in certain situations. But the way we have managed what we call the Spring Creek Community Forest Project has really been an unfunded, unapproved, permaculture-inspired version of land care without the paperwork and the poisons. And that's been going on here for 20 years. More formally, with the Friars Forest Eco Village, we set up a structure with approval from the local government for effectively, under the planning system, timber harvesting. So we're greenies with chainsaws, and the community thins the forest for fire safety, and we manage that. And of course we use all that product because this is actually work, and it's labour intensive work, and especially when you do it in a way that's best for the forest. So using those products that come from that, which is primarily firewood, fuel, mulch, and in some cases more larger, longer, usable pole timbers, with a vision that maybe future generations might even have some structural larger timber that if they choose they will harvest. So really this is sustainable forestry where you're putting work in and creating greater value in the future, but there is always byproducts, and ironically the lowest level, lowest value byproduct is biomass energy. And yet we don't have that as part of our discussion of the need for the 100% renewable energy rollout in this country.
Yeah. Yep.
So I am trying, and I of course have been on this story for a long time, trying to alert people firstly to that in Europe this is a big part of the of the renewable energy mix. Always has been, and it's been growing, and there's not huge environmental community conflict over it, but also that we have this huge potential for bioenergy from our forests. Now, it doesn't mean it suddenly means we can do that as some sort of business as usual substitution for coal, but when we talk about 100% renewable energy electricity system, the missing link in that is dispatchable power, power that can be switched on when you want to go with the intermittent nature of wind and solar. Pumped hydro storage is being developed. Batteries are this sort of big technological hope. Then there's, the hydrogen economy. All of these sort of ways of how do we store energy or balance the system. But the no-brainer is wood energy. Of course, that releases carbon dioxide, but it's actually carbon neutral if the growth of the systems it's coming from are sequestering, taking an equal amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
So can you explain just a little bit so that people understand what it is that you're talking about? How would a system like that work, and particularly on a community scale? And maybe even in places like Africa where, this type of energy system would make such a difference?
Yeah, well, ironically, the scale we need to do it at in the rich countries is about the same scale it needs to be done in Africa, ironically. For them, it might be a scale up from, collecting some sticks and burning it in a very inefficient, smoky fire for cooking. For us, it's a scale down. We definitely don't want corporations putting our forests in the maw of retrofitted coal-fired power stations, even though that is actually technically, we could retrofit our coal-fired power stations to run on wood. But the way I see it developing is through a community energy model. In the same way that we have Hepburn Wind here in our community that's owned as a co-op, 2 wind turbines rather than a foreign corporation owning 200 of them. We could have community scale biomass energy, and that is the way to halt this taking the solution and turning it back into the problem. So and working at these interface zones. Like around this town, there's 2,000 hectares, which is called the Hepburn Regional Park. Has moderate level status as conservation land, but could be managed, is managed for fire safety by some periodic hot burns on the ridges that we could be managing to actually have community scale energy.
So what you're saying, basically, by managing our forest differently, we're helping to accelerate decomposition, which is helping to improve resilience against bushfire. It's helping to improve the soil so that the rate of growth of those trees is more, so there's more drawdown of carbon. You're creating a safer climate through all this work that you're doing, creating micro-enterprises, creating energy systems. So in a way, exactly what you're saying is addressing the bushfire crisis and the climate and the ecological crisis all in one go.
So now, not saying this is, the answer, but it's highly symbolic of how we resolve this ridiculous divide between it's the lack of burning stupid or it's the climate stupid that just keep going round and round. And then sensible people saying, well, we need to do both these. Well, this actually does both in the same action because having some dispatchable power actually is that missing link. We know wind and solar, can provide a lot of electricity in the right environments, but it's also up and down. So the whole way of how do we have a renewable energy grid, and if we can do that in a way which is also increasing our resilience to climate change induced bushfires, because we know we're going to be dealing with that anyway, even if we achieve some imagined massive zero net economy in a couple of decades, we'll still be dealing with this climate. And how can we do that in a way that leaves the forests in better shape for future generations? So the principles of that are pretty simple, but of course the realities are also that biomass for energy is a very low value product. But if we can do that at a level where we get gain from the electricity at retail energy rates within microgrids that are connected to the larger grid, then suddenly the economics can start to add up. But even before that, so there's all those sort of organisational things to do with the electricity grid, if governments could recognise that this community engagement is what's actually needed, that we can't just have professional management of the landscape. So researchers David Bowman and policy specialist Jason Alexandra have already proposed this idea of community-based management, sort of like a rebooted land care 2.0 that is not, okay, we have community or volunteer firefighting, but this is voluntary management of our common territory to make it more fire resilient.
So what do you think needs to shift to enable that to happen more? If you were to speak to, people making the decisions who would help to shift subsidies or help to shift decisions making, what are the decisions that need to change and what are the blocks that need to be removed to allow this to happen at the scale that it needs to happen? Because everything's about, accelerating the pace and the breadth of these solutions.
At the scale of funding from government and from philanthropic groups and others, both in the renewable energy sector and in the response to the bushfire, there needs to be an identification of small working models or proposals that can show this at a small scale. So we need that. We don't need a plan to sort of like roll this out across the country, because no one actually knows what this is in this country. It's like rooftop solar, provided that, this is our energy. Oh yeah, it produces about this much. This whole community education process that happened. And then as it grew, it turned out to be very significant, which the government, of course, didn't expect would happen. Now, this one is more complicated than just ordering some solar panels to put on your roof, but it has many more benefits than the solar panels only have the benefit of electricity, whereas managing our environment has lots of benefits. At the local government scale and the community scale, we need to free up where people are actively doing this sort of management, even if they're doing it in a messy, uncontrolled way. So that local government regulation about collecting firewood off the side of roads, thinning out the bit of bush near you. We need to cut all the red tape that is restricting people from doing those sort of actions. At the same time that we don't cut regulation, in fact we strengthen regulation for very large scale corporate development backed by bank financing, because those things are big. When they go wrong, they make big mistakes. Down at the small scale, people doing things in the household and community non-monetary economies, the costs or the downsides of someone doing something badly is just a learning opportunity. So local government needs to actually adopt a framework we've suggested here, and not with any success in our local government yet, that if residents are doing things on adjacent public land, any management, whether it's grazing animals or cutting some firewood or whatever, and they're doing that outside of some business, official business, and they're doing it without bank finance, out of their own resources, and they're engaged with other people who are potentially affected, other residents, and they're not using machinery greater than, say, 5 kilowatts capacity, then by default, you don't need a permit to do anything.
Yeah, great. Yep.
So this is like a radical shock for, government regulation. But you can then have a sort of proviso that if there's a lot of complaints and or what people are doing can demonstrably be shown to adversely affecting council infrastructure, environmental values or amenity greater than the benefits coming from that, then council could, require a permit with conditions or prohibit an action. So there's a sort of like an after the action, whereas when we're talking about the very large scale way most of our economy works, you need strong regulation up front to stop bad stuff happening.
It's a little bit like the whole city farm movement. When we first started, it was often just inhabiting spaces, but ever since, the new policies come in, it's actually blocked a lot of people from doing it because it takes them so long to get access to land, and then the controls are so much that it limits.
So this discourse in the society of, do we need tighter regulation to stop bad things happening, or do we need a freeing up? And that goes back and forth as an idea. Whereas when we adjust that with scale and say the corporate world, there's a lot of evidence worldwide, and we need much stronger national government regulation and control of that. In the personally owned business world, where there's actually a responsible person, a human who actually runs it rather than a self-organising entity like a corporation, then we need changes in the way regulations are applied, but not necessarily more or less. And in the household and community and informal economies, we need a freeing up. Like, let it rip, let stuff happen, and accept we're in a world where bad shit is happening on a big scale, from the adverse things that we've done to nature in terms of the climate and in terms of these large forces of global capital. But we've got a huge creative potential of allowing people to do things. On the other side is people need to take that risk and directly do stuff that they know is good for themselves, good for the community, and good for the environment at a small scale, see how it works, see how others relate to that, and don't ask for permission.
That's right. So there was another element of the bushfire conversation that I wanted to ask you. So, we're still in a state of shock nationally, I think, from what's happened, and starting to have conversations about what happens next. So how do you see permaculture from that perspective able to inform the conversations that are had in the rebuilding or the immediate addressing of people having lost their farms, having lost their gardens, having lost their homes, having, the forest destroyed around them, and starting in many ways from scratch? Like, what can we do in those places as a permaculture community to support those groups and areas?
Well, of course, the alternatives to what's called disaster capitalism, where huge money is sort of in government forces to often rebuild, sometimes replicating the same mistakes. We need to look at slower approaches to development, but more sensitive to what individual communities and individuals within those communities, families and businesses want to do. Because some people will take that crisis in terms of, I need to get back to normal, and sometimes that will be even wanting to rebuild in somewhere that's incredibly fire vulnerable or just in the same way, and others will be looking at, I need to actually shift and change what I'm doing here, or I need to live somewhere else. So those opportunities to take a crisis as an opportunity for change and growth need to be facilitated and assisted, rather than say we will encourage like all the one sort of thing with some tweaks to the building regulations or whatever. So clearly permaculture design as a holistic approach can look at the context of the land. Is this actually a good place to live? What is involved in living more sustainably on that site? Because that relationship to the land is very important. And it does mean that a lot of more remote sites are actually not so suited to permanent habitation. But we also need to look at how to support people the further they are from central supported services, the more self-reliant they are. So whether it's with power and roads and water systems, that we actually encourage and require people to be more self-reliant.
It's a little bit like the One Planet living system they've got in Wales, that you can go out and develop up farms and sustainable homesteads as long as it has those underlying ethical, sustainable principles about regenerating the land, farming in a way that's creating a level of abundance, being off the grid, all of those things, and it's making it's also making it affordable for younger people to create communities, set up homesteads as well. So,
I think the permaculture site design, which focuses on, okay, if we live here, what are the water systems? What are the food systems? Because growing food around where we live is actually one of those next buffers, rather than this idea we live in a house, which is something from this technological world, which is like a spaceship that's landed in a natural bush environment that we don't manage. So we have to accept that we will manage and change that area immediately around the house, because that is all part of the resilience. So if that question is, well, we're out in some pristine wilderness that we don't want to change, well, maybe that's not quite the place
to be.
To be. And then also that question of, for a lot of people, the whole stay and defend, leave early or leaving regularly. Well, is this sustainable? Me jumping in my car with just-in-time guaranteed supply of fuel and an open road, or do I need to be more home-based? And if I'm not prepared to be home-based and defend this space, then maybe, this is not the place for me to live.
So I just want to jump back a bit, so as well, because they're really important points. But I also like the point that you just said there, that actually the landscape of the food landscape around is a very important part of this becoming a rehydrated landscape in which it's far less prone to burning.
Yeah, well, having productive gardens by definition means that you need soil which is open, absorbent and holds water and nutrients. And people understand that, plants that are full of moisture, irrigated, are less prone to burning. And of course that means you need water systems that are resilient through the worst of droughts. And of course in southern Australia we're used to designing for that cycle. Of course this last fires have shown that need into areas where that's been less of a problem in the past. But also, a lot of people are not aware that plants that are full of nutrients, that those nutrients actually act as a fire retardant within the foliage of plants. And it's no accident that Australian native vegetation, the predominant vegetation, is so flammable, sure, it's got all these oils and resins, but those things are actually things that the plants make as substitutes for minerals. And they're all very flammable. They're all like petrochemicals. So it's no accident that in southern Australia, in a Mediterranean climate, for example, the oak forests from the Mediterranean, for example, even though they can burn in the worst fires, they're much less flammable than our eucalypts. And we can then look at fruit trees and those sorts of plants, let alone vegetables, which are massively full of both water and nutrients. So there's a sort of a hierarchy in a permaculture design sense of the zone 1 immediately around the house that has the maximum of that, and further out we go, we get down back to a landscape where we have to manage it by thinning, by opening, by grazing, by making it less burnable because there's less biomass. But ironically, that core around houses, if not a dense jungle, needs to be that core of the most resistant vegetation. And that's, of course, our food supply.
Yep. And that makes so much sense. So just to round off our conversation, we're in a climate and ecological emergency. What is your response, again, from a permaculture perspective to that? What can we say? So if permaculture was, say, as a whole community to say we declare that we're in a climate ecological emergency, which is essentially what permaculture has done since the beginning, but there's this new language around it. We're getting architects declare, engineers declare, the AMA has just declared. So if permaculture as a whole community could say we declare a climate ecological emergency and this is our response, what would you put forward as being the key actions that we need to take at a broader scale? So we've been talking about the home scale, but things that we can do to amplify the voice of permaculture more rapidly and more broadly than it has already. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's just about every country of the world. For 40 years, there's massive amounts of experience. How can we make it more visible, I think, is my question.
Well, I think part of it is the replication and interpretation of that household level work, which my retro suburbia work is part of that, and it's very significant that there's 2 chapters in that book, one on bushfire resilient design and disaster planning. We've actually made those available now as free downloadable, those chapters, because they directly relate to this issue. But this management of the common land, of self-organising to, having grazing animals that go out, having people go out and cut biomass to feed animals, to make compost, to manage our immediate landscape is a very big part of what permaculture can contribute, and in ways that are not fire enhancing, that ways that reduce fire, that there is some track record in that. Of course, that has been restricted, a lot of that action, to private land in the past. But like the example of what we are doing here, we need those working examples around. And I think that approach of that what people do at home and in their communities is actually the missing link in a bushfire or natural disaster response anyway, because we've just seen there are limits to even the richest country in the world with the best firefighting resources in the world, with the best volunteer services. If you don't have a self-reliant community that can be the backup, that has its home stores of food, that is not dependent, then it doesn't matter how good you get at that top end, you don't have the capacity. So permaculture focus on that resilient households and community building, of course, is not just for bushfire, it's for all of the climate emergency and other things that people may see as unrelated, whether that's like flu pandemics or all of those things. The same sets of strategies turn out to be resilient, or at least increase resilience in response to all of those threats.
Yep, great. So becoming more resilient at home and in our community, and I think very much thinking about beyond our own boundaries as well, expanding our mind to thinking more in that scale. So tearing down the fences in our mind in a way, I think.
Yeah, and of course at the deepest level, permaculture's been a form of advanced environmental education, including for children, connecting to the environment. You know, being aware it's a hot, windy day. We are already sort of planning, and not in a fearful way, but in a planned way, rather than, oh, it's a hot day, I'm going and watching Netflix. You know, that one's relationship to the weather actually shapes what we do. And yeah, like us, we don't go on holidays in peak fire season. We go in the autumn and winter. You know, that these sort of behavioural changes of normalising a relationship to nature, of full spectrum awareness and interaction with nature, not in a fearful way, but an empowered way.
Great. Well, thank you for your time today, David. And I know there's so much within what you've just said there that is absolutely critical for how I think we need to be moving forward. And I will put links down below, so any of the references that David's mentioned, I'll put down below, and also a link to the paper that you've just released. So just want to just quickly...
yeah, it's really trying to pull together the core truths in those two extreme ideas. It's the lack of land management stupid, it's the not addressing the climate change stupid, that actually we can weave the recognisable truths in both those positions into a common position where we directly act and can do things that reduce this ideological divide that is opening up in our communities.
So I think what David's saying is start looking down around your commons and connecting with your communities, and start to just transform the land in and around your place where you are. And I think looking to what you've done, looking to what other places doing commons projects are doing, and just starting to amplify that and telling the story, sharing the story so that other people can be inspired to actually see the possibilities, that there is another way. Because I think sometimes we just don't, we're hearing the alarms going off, but we're not seeing the language around this. Is something around, we're hearing the alarms, but we don't see the exits. So actually pointing the way to the different avenues that can be taken that are a positive way forward. Yeah. So thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
I really want to thank you so much for being here as part of this conversation. It's such a critical issue that we need to explore together and to have conversations about. There is by no means only one answer and only one response to this. But I think what we need to be doing is to be putting different ideas on the table and be opening up different conversations and exploring different responses and looking at how we can individually, as communities, and more broadly, contribute to addressing the climate and ecological emergency and all the things that happen as a result of that, be it floods and fires and droughts and various catastrophes that are emerging and will continue to emerge. So again, I really welcome you to join the Permaculture Educators Program. I encourage you to let your young people know about Permaculture Youth, Perma Youth movement that's emerging too, which is permayouth.org. And if you're a permaculture practitioner, to really think about joining up to be a permaculture ambassador, to step up, to speak up about the ways that permaculture can help us respond to the climate and ecological emergency. So more details are coming about that soon. We'll be launching that program at the Australasian Permaculture Convergence in Brisbane at the end of April. So I look forward to inviting you to be part of that as well. Hi, it's Morag from Our Permaculture Life and the Permaculture Education Institute. I'm at Daryl Taylor's house up in King Lake. This is an earth ship And this earthship was built in response to the devastating bushfires that came through here 11 years ago. So Daryl is rebuilding this house as an example of ways to build a resilient home, a home that is safe in a bushfire, and it shows how to actually build places that will not get burnt down in a bushfire. So this house is also a natural home based on biotecture principles and permaculture principles. And it's in process, and Daryl is going to join me soon to talk about all the ways that his biotecture and permaculture principles have been embedded into the design of this place, and all the special features that he's incorporated really carefully to actually think about how to create bushfire resilient homes and settlements too. So I hope you'll join me for that, and I'll let you know when that's released. Hi, it's Morag from Our Permaculture Life and the Permaculture Education Institute. And we're here in East Gippsland at the moment. I'm here with Claire-Lise Gamble, and we're at an earth-sheltered home, a home that's been designed particularly to be safe in bushfires. And having been here in East Gippsland while the bushfire infernos are around us, and you can even see today, I don't know if you can see, but actually the smoke is still thick. I thought actually sharing the story of your house would be a really important thing to do, because as we start to rebuild and think about how we're moving into the future to create bushfire safe communities, homes like this are really, really important to look at. So this is a house actually that my uncle built about 25 years ago as an own and builder house, and it's an earth sheltered home. And it's a home that you've been living in here now, Claire-Lise, for 15 years.
Yes.
And so I'd love to hear from you a bit more about why it's built and what are the features that make it bushfire safe, and actually what it's like living in an earth-sheltered home. So I hope you'll join me for masterclass number 23 next month. And the topic for masterclass number 23 is all about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and really looking at actually how the Sustainable Development Goals have permaculture embedded within them, and that the people who are involved in creating the Sustainable Development Goals, actually a number of them were permaculture people. And they see that as a way to have a universal set of goals that are accepted around the world that articulate the sorts of things that we need to be doing in the world, and that they very much see that permaculture is the way that this can be rolled out. So connecting our thinking and our understanding around the permaculture principles and the SDGs. So join me for that. I'll be sending out notification of how to log in and register for that very soon. So there's another thing that I wanted to let you know about, and that is that the Permaculture Education Institute is in conversation at the moment with the Lush Foundation, particularly through their Disaster Response Fund. And that is to actually look at how we can together support the rebuilding of resilient communities through helping to support the development of permaculture gardens, whether they be gardens around people's homes or gardens in community spaces, whether community gardens, school gardens, common spaces. Now, part of that is about offering free permaculture education in bushfire affected zones, and also working with people and inviting volunteers to help to support people who would like to have kind of a permablitz in their place to help rebuild their gardens. Because the thing is that, you know, houses might be insured, but gardens aren't. And actually one of the ways to start to rebuild life, rebuild community, rebuild connection, and to bring a bit of hope and life into these devastated communities is to actually have a garden. So if you're interested in joining me in that, please do send me an email at morag@permacultureeducationinstitute.org, and we're looking to be getting some things happening by about May this year. While we're waiting for that all to happen and to come through, though, I have opened up a portal within the Ethos Foundation, which is the registered permaculture charity that I run in conjunction with the Permaculture Education Institute. So if you would like to donate to the bushfire recovery using permaculture to be able to offer free permaculture education and to help organise permablitzes, then please donate there. And send me a note too when you make the donation that it's particularly for the bushfires, because I also do support other programs in places like Kenya and Uganda and Tanzania. I also received a request to let you know about an initiative to support organic and biodynamic farmers who were affected by the bushfires. So I'll put a link down below too about how you can support them. They're currently receiving requests from farmers and also people who are willing to be volunteers. So make sure that, if there's something that you feel that, if this is something you feel like you really care about and you want to help make a difference, there are ways to be involved directly in supporting people through permaculture and regenerative farming practices. Given the enormity of this situation, there is so much work to be done. We really do need to roll up our sleeves and get involved, and that means everyone. And even overseas, there's ways that you can help too. And I know many people have donated to supporting the wildlife, and that's been absolutely fantastic. What we need now, though, as well as that, is to be supporting the communities to get their gardens and their farms back up and running. So these programs that we're launching now are really important to give support to. So I do hope that you'll contribute, whether it be your money through the donations or through your time as a volunteer. And that would be absolutely fantastic. So also too, if you're listening to this and you are affected by the bushfires, then I do encourage you to get in touch and to nominate your place, your community, a local school, to get access to this free permaculture and to be rebuilding permaculture gardens in your area. So I look forward to hearing from you, either whether you're needing the support or whether you're willing to offer that support. I want to thank you all for being part of tonight's masterclass, the Permaculture Education Institute Permaculture Masterclass series. And I also want to thank David Holmgren for joining me in this particular masterclass as well. So until next time, I really look forward to chatting with you on all the various mediums, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn. We're there on all those different forms and really look forward to having really great conversations with you there. And also for all of you who are part of the Permaculture Educators Program, I look forward to continued discussion about everything that you're doing as part of that program to become really fabulous designers and educators in all the different parts of the world that you are. So don't forget, you can stick around for a little bit longer and have a chat online here now. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time. See you later. Bye.